Hi everyone, this is Ayush Maniar here. I am an incoming student in the Computer Science and Engineering department. Prior to joining UCSD, I worked with Walmart Global Tech as a data scientist 3 for the past 3 years. And I wanted to make this video to demonstrate my teaching skills where I try to explain a complicated topic in a much more simpler manner. So I have decided to choose the topic of hypothesis testing and p values because I feel this is something that a lot of students have difficulty to understand, and a lot of popular statistics textbooks tend to unnecessarily complicate this topic. So let's dive right into it. Let's take an example of a psychology researcher who came up with the idea of power pose. So the idea basically is that if you are sitting in a power pose or like a confident posture 2 minutes before a job interview, then you are likely to have an elevated level of confidence as compared to when you sit in a normal pose. And in order to test this idea, in order to see whether this claim is true or not, they would have to design some experiments on a lot of groups of people. So let's see how such an experiment would look like. We can set up the experiment by taking a large group of people, say 1000 people, and dividing them into two groups of 500 people each, where the first group is called the control group, and the control group is asked to sit normally and do whatever they do usually before the interview begins. Whereas the second group, also called the power pose group, is told to adopt a power pose 2 minutes before the interview. And what we can do to collect the data is right before the interview starts, we can ask people from each of these groups to rate their confidence level from 0 to 10. Now that we have the idea and the experiment ready, we can take a look at null hypothesis and p values and how they can help us make better conclusions once we have collected the data via the experiments. So, the null hypothesis basically means that we treat all situations similarly. However, the unofficial definition, which I think is better for us researchers, is that the null hypothesis represents status quo and is generated while keeping a lot of skepticism in mind. So, for example, for our use case, we would say that the null hypothesis is something like power posing has no effect whatsoever on the confidence level of the interviewee. As in, whether you do a power pose or not do a power pose, the confidence level would stay the same. Similarly, if you are a botany researcher and you have come up with a fertilizer which you think can increase the plant growth, then the null hypothesis would be that addition of fertilizer has no effect on the plant growth. So, what are p values? P values is nothing but the probability of the null hypothesis being true. So, for example, if the p value is 0.05, then it would mean that if we repeat the experiment 10 number of times, then only for 5% of experiments the null hypothesis would be true, as in we would observe no difference between power posing and no power posing. Whereas for the other 95% of the experiments, we would see a significant difference in confidence level through power posing versus compared to no power posing. Let's say we finally got hands on the data after experiments, and the data looked something like this, where the mean of the power pose and control group have a lot of difference between them. So in this case, the p value would be really low, something like 0.03, and in this case we would reject the null hypothesis, because remember, the null hypothesis states that power posing has no effect on the confidence of the interviewee. However, in this particular case, we can clearly see there is a lot of difference, right? And what if the data looked something like this, where the points are very merged together and there is almost no difference between the power pose and the control group, right? In this case, the value of p would be really high, something like 0.94, and in this case we would say that we failed to reject the null hypothesis because we do not see a significant difference between the power pose and control group. So yeah, this was basically the video. I hope you liked the presentation. Thank you so much for your time.